There was this woman who lived a long, hard, laborious life. She was in the hospital and was not well, and she made her transition. She passed on. And she went to the pearly gates and met St. Peter there, and St. Peter said to her, in order to get in here, you have to spell a word. And she says, well, okay, what's the word? St. Peter says, love. She said, oh, no problem. Love. He says, okay, you can come on in. He says, but by the way, would you do me a favor and watch the gate for me? I have to run a quick errand. And she says, well, I'm willing to help out, but what do I do? And he says, well, just do the same thing that I did. And she says, okay. And so she's tending the gates and watching over the gates for St. Peter. And all of a sudden, her husband shows up. And she says, what are you doing here? And he says, I was in a car wreck on the way home from visiting you at the hospital. And she says, well, to get in here, you have to spell a word. And he says, oh, is that all? Well, what's the word? And she said, Czechoslovakia. They had a couple of unhealed issues. We are here on Labor Day weekend, and actually I don't often speak on Labor Day weekend because I'm on the board of directors of a retreat called the Big Sky Retreat that meets every Labor Day weekend. And so for years and years, I have, for 20-some years, I have been on this board and been active in this retreat. And so it's in Montana, 45 minutes from West Yellowstone, actually. And Diane, my wife, and I are flying there later today after services. Going to miss the first couple days. We didn't want to be away 2 Sundays in September because I have another very important date that is coming up in mid-September, and that is my brother is getting married. Yes, my older brother, and my one and only older brother, and he's been a bachelor all these years, and he's now 68, and they thought it's about time. So he's got a real sweet gal. So today I want to talk to you on the topic of labor, and I want to share a bit of history, a bit of scripture, and a bit of inspiration. First of all, a bit of history. I had really never looked into the origin and the history of Labor Day and how it came into being and all that. And I don't know if you have, but very quickly I want to just share with you. I found it kind of interesting that, it came out of course, the labor movement, and it was designed to be a yearly national tribute to the contributions that workers have made to the strength, the prosperity, and the well-being of our country. And most of the data that comes out talks about a guy named McGuire for having come up with the idea. And he, as a young boy at 11 years old, sold papers and did, clean stores, shine shoes, did all kinds of these things to help support his mother and 6 brothers and sisters, because it was 1863 and his father had just left to go fight in the Civil War. Now, many immigrants, as you know, had settled in New York City in the 19th century, and the living conditions were not good. And often there were as many as 6 families that would try to crowd into a household that was made for one family. There were thousands of children that had to go to work in working conditions that were often terrible back then, and men, women, and children, worked in factories 10 to 12 hours a day. And if they had to come to work even if they were tired and sick, because they would get fired because there were thousands of people waiting to take their place. So it was tough. And when Peter became 17, he picked up a trade, apprenticeship as in a piano shop. And at night he started attending meetings, and they started talking about organizing and forming unions. And so in the spring of 1872, Peter himself led 100,000 workers on strike, marching through the streets, became known as the disturber of the public peace. And So 10 years later, after that, they actually began to form unions. The first union was formed in St. Louis, Missouri, the Carpenters Union. Then there were factory workers, dock workers, tool makers, etc. And then another McGuire came along, spelled differently, but sounds the same, McGuire, and this was Matthew McGuire, and he is the one who proposed the holiday in 1882. And he was actually a machinist who moved up to become secretary of the Central Labor Union in New York. And so on September 5th, 1882, the first Labor Day was celebrated with a parade of 20,000 workers marching up Broadway in New York City. And from there, the idea spread coast to coast, and other states were passing municipal ordinances and things. And so about 10 years later, in 1894, Congress voted it to be a federal holiday. And they outlined what it was to be. The form of the observance of the day was to include a street parade and some kind of festival or picnics for the workers and their families. So that's kind of the story. But what you didn't know, I don't think you know this, and that is that there is something that was called Labor Sunday that was adopted in 1901, Labor Sunday. And this was by the American Federation of Labor. They proposed that the Sunday that precedes the first Monday of September would be dedicated to the spiritual and educational aspects of labor. So, whether you realize it or not, we are sitting on Labor Sunday. This is it, folks. I don't know if you feel any different, but here we are. So I want to dedicate today to the spiritual aspects of labor and getting beyond really the heavy labors of life. You know, when you think about the word labor, what do you think about? It's pretty much kind of physical labor by the sweat of your brow. You think about laborers who work hard, people that have to lift and help and assist, and sometimes even, I was told about care nurses, that what a tremendous job that is, backbreaking labor sometimes. And we also think about women being in hard labor, when they're delivering a child. And back in early days, not so much anymore at all, but women, it was a really threat to their life to have a child. Many died in childbirth. And you can look no further than the book of Genesis and see that Jacob's wife, Rachel, died in childbirth. And it states in the passage that it came to pass, as her soul was departing, that she called out the name of the child. So she got to name the child with her final breaths and named the child Benoni. And her husband Jacob then called him Benjamin. So biblically, if you think of Benjamin, that was Rachel that gave birth and passed in that. But for many, and even biblically, the word labor can mean sometimes, suffering and hardship and struggle and the labors of life. And we can experience those labors on many levels, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally and spiritually. All of these. We can kind of labor internally and many of us have at various times in our life, through loss. We've labored through sadness and through doubt and fears, various kinds of fears, frustrations and things that we don't want to change in our life, that we have seemingly no choice about. And we've labored over unforgiveness, where we had difficulty forgiving someone, lovelessness, that we may have felt, self-condemnation, our insecurities. We've labored through these kinds of things, and we've labored through health challenges and work challenges and prosperity challenges and relationship challenges. We've labored through age-related challenges and just all kinds of different circumstances. And so, when we think about what it is that causes us to labor most, it comes back to really that age-old problem that is man's main problem, which is a sense of separation. Really, where we really go into a sense of labor and kind of struggle and suffering, the more distant and far removed we are from connecting with the divine. Everything seems to be worse when we think and feel that we are having to do everything on our own, alone, struggling through life. The idea that then life is a struggle, that life is hard, that it's so difficult, and that basically, it's us against the world. All of these kinds of thoughts begin to come up, and we feel so alone. And that's basically a kind of a laboring at various stages that we go through on our journey in life. So A consciousness of separation is basically something that leads to amplifying the feeling that life is laborious. It's hard, it's harsh. And whereas oneness and the consciousness of oneness and establishing that connection with the divine brings more of a consistent sense of ease and grace and even pleasantness about life. You know, that state of consciousness tends to grease the wheels of life, if you will, and bring a sense that there's a divine order that is operating in the universe, that there's a presence and a power there to assist us, that there is serendipity and there is synchronicity and there is grace and help that is there if we make the steps to remember to connect in oneness to that source of help in every time of need. You know, I say and used to say on the radio, and one of our statements still, even in our welcome packets, life is meant to be good. And I believe that. I really do. There is a flow to life. You know, when you allow yourself to be in a spiritual currents, if you consciously look to do that, it can assist and soften many of the harsh aspects of life. It just does. The truth will set you free. You see things from a new perspective, from a higher vibration or perspective or knowing that alters and softens things. You may not agree with that assessment, but the truth is that that's the message that is conveyed even in many of the stories that you find through the Bible. The one that is most commonly referred to is the story of the Garden of Eden with Adam and Eve. You know, and in the garden everything was provided. You know, there was no struggle, there were no fears, there was no sense of labor. It was all taken care of. And then you know, it talks about out of the ground the Lord God made grow every tree that was pleasant to the sight and good for food. In other words, everything there fed you, nourished you on all levels of being, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. It was like a garden. Okay? And all that one is asked of a garden is to till it and to keep it. In other words, to tend it, to tend one's spiritual connection. Every one of us is like a garden, and we have to tend to our spiritual connection. That's important. Now, another requirement, of course, in that story was that one could eat of any tree except the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which means really the tree of the knowledge of good and not good. That's basically it. Good and not good. So all it's saying is that allegorically you need to keep your focus on oneness. Oneness with God is to focus on seeing the good in most all of life. Focus on the good, think on the good, eat of the good, partake of the good, ingest the good, integrate the good. That's what it's about, the good and that which is of God. Don't eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and not good. Because if you do, now you've really stepped into the power of duality, focusing on less than good. That can be the way of your life. And when you do, it says you shall surely die if you eat of that tree. And basically what dies is not you physically. It's talking about you have a death of the experience of the frequency, the vibration, the light, the power of God moving through you when you have that right perspective, when you see with the eyes of God. Okay, so now you're seeing differently. And that state of being is a death of oneness that goes away. And you begin to move into the labors of separation as a result. It's all allegorical. It's just telling the story where some of your pain and harshness and difficulty really originates from and how it came about. It's told in a story. And breaking away from the law of oneness basically throws us then out of the experience of the garden of goodness and into the struggle and the hardships. And even the psalmist talks about this in many ways. One of the things when you read in the Psalms, and there's a few other places where it talks about the fear of the Lord. And it really is a mistranslation. Scholars have said that really they did not mean to say you should be afraid of God or fear the Lord. It was really the word that got translated, but it was meant to be revere the Lord. Okay? Respect the Lord. Honor the Lord. That type of thing. So it's not like a parent you're afraid of and therefore you do good or you do what's right based on fear. It's out of respect and reverence. So where you read fear the Lord, it should be in your mind you go to revere the Lord. So here's the psalmist, what he says. The psalmist, the writer says, "Blessed is everyone that feareth the Lord." Revereth the Lord. Got it? Okay? That walks in his ways. For God shall eat the labor of thine hands. In other words, will take away the labors, the sense that life is laborious and hard. Happy you shall be, and it shall be well with thee. Thy wife shall be as a fruitful vine by the sides of thine house. Your wife is happy. The children like olive plants round about thy table. Your children are happy. Behold, in this way shall man be blessed that feareth the Lord, that revereth the Lord. You get that? Even Proverbs has something to say about labor. And in the 14th chapter, the writer of the wisdom literature known as Proverbs says this: in all labor there is profit, but the talk of the lips tendeth only toward penury. That means, to start with, in all labor, there is profit. It means in all challenges and difficulties, there's something to be gained. There's something to learn. Okay? But only if you do more than lip service. You see? You have to walk your talk. And so that second part, but the talk of the lips tendeth to penury. You know what penury is? I'd never come across that word, penury. It's in the Bible. Found it was in the dictionary too. You know what penury means? It means extreme want and extreme poverty, limitation. And that means if you give this stuff lip service, you're heading back into the labor of extreme want, extreme poverty, extreme limitation. That's what it's saying. Wisdom literature, a proverb, okay? Jesus also talked about labor. There are two passages mainly. One is more familiar than the other to you. The first one is where he said, labor not for the meat which perisheth. Do not labor and work so hard on the meat that will perish. In other words, your outer life is important. We love it. We honor it. But at the same time, don't neglect the meat that does not perish, is what he's saying. And he goes on, but labor not for the meat which perisheth, but for that meat which endureth unto everlasting life. It's talking about work on your inner life. Okay? Yes, you have an outer physical life that requires labor, but there's another level of labor. There's an inner labor, a kind of a soft labor, if you will. Light lifting that has to do with the dynamic of the inner track that you're on as a spiritual being. And so he talks about the true bread. He mentions Moses, and Moses brought forth the manna from heaven. Well, that was actually physical bread that fell on the ground and they ate it. He says that my Father brings true bread from heaven, and he says that true bread giveth life into the world. He's talking about the invisible internal bread that feeds you as a soul. He's making that distinction. The other place where Jesus talks about labor, you'll be and recognize, it's very familiar, where he says, come unto me all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Wonderful verse, wonderful verse. When we feel laborious, the harshness, the struggle of life, that verse, just to read it, he's saying, come unto me. All ye that labor and are heavy laden. And his next sentence is, take my yoke upon you and learn of me from me. For I am gentle and lowly of heart. I'm filled with the heart. And you shall find rest unto your souls. My yoke is easy and my burden is light. Great verse. He's basically inviting us into discipleship to accept and to live those teachings. In the New Testament, we're introduced to his teachings, his ways, that allow us to remember that we are called to return to higher states of living, of love and peace and joy, the higher vibration, the higher road. And basically, it's to learn also the yoke of prayer. He talks about the inner life and the importance. He demonstrates that as well. Prayer is the track that takes one away from separation and into oneness. We're told biblically, pray without ceasing, and really you need to take that literally. Never underestimate the power of prayer, and also the power of the gratitude prayer. Very, very powerful. I had a personal experience that happened to me recently, and it was challenging in my life. Last month, I had my car broken into. They smashed the back window and took my briefcase. And in my briefcase, I had some really important things. And actually, it was while I was attending a board meeting. Okay? And so I was really unhappy. I went into hard labor. I was really processing that for a couple of hours anyway. And see, it was a brand new Father's Day gift from my eldest daughter who lives up in Seattle. She had mailed it to me. It was very expensive leather briefcase. And in it was my wallet. I had taken my wallet out and put it in, and I never do that. I would never leave my briefcase there. It was a weird thing I just did that day, and I took my wallet out because my hip hurt, and I didn't want to sit through the board meeting on this hip. Not that I have a lot in my wallet, believe me. But anyway, I just didn't want anything. So my wallet was gone, and a couple $100, driver's license, credit cards, all of that. But the worst of it all, you know that I've been to India 4 times, and I've been there for deepening and all kinds of things. And I had just been to Atlanta to speak on oneness. And I had all my notebooks from oneness, tremendous amount, meticulous notes, stories, illustrations, exercises. All my material was in there. And that was really hard. That was like irreplaceable. And so I just really went into inner sickness, inner heaviness, internal labor, separation consciousness. I was there. I was there for a couple hours. And then a voice inside me reminded me that those notes and journaling were actually about oneness. And that I needed to do more than lip service, or I would have penury. So I went into prayer, and I really did. And I said, okay. And I called on the presence of God. I called on Jesus Christ. I called on the Holy Spirit. I called on Buddha, Amma, Bhagavan, all the heavy hitters, the big guns. I did. And I asked for help. And I really shifted. I shifted to the place where I said, okay, doggone it, nothing's lost in spirit. Somehow that's going to come back to me. I don't know how. And I prayed that somehow whoever took it, that there's a core of good in them, and that they would not throw it into a dumpster or somewhere where we'd never discover it again, but that they would somehow find, maybe look through it a little bit and see a couple of my emails were to Reverend Howard Caesar. And that I had notes and so forth that were very, spiritually inclined. There was even a CD that had a picture of me, Reverend Caesar, on. So it was like that they got, this was the Revs, the senior minister. Also, there was I had a notebook, one of my oneness notebooks, when you opened it up, I had a picture of Jesus right there. So if they looked at that, it was, oh, we got to give this back. So that was what I held out. I even told my facilities guys to look around the bushes that maybe they'll come back and drop it off. And I had them specifically look and hunt for it a few times. So this went on for a while, and every day, I swear, every day I thought about it, and I kept saying, okay, I know that this can come back to me. I'm not going to give up on this. And you know what happened? 1 month to the day, okay, the same numerical number that it was stolen on. The next month, we get a call to the church. It was a law firm, and they said, is this the ministry of Reverend Howard Caesar? Yes. Did he lose a briefcase? Yes. And so they referred the call to me. I went over there, got it, and everything was in it, except my wallet. I was so thankful, so thankful. It was awesome. And you know what had happened, and the thing was, it was meticulous. It wasn't like it had been sat out in the weather for a month in that parking lot, because, well, it just wouldn't have. They apparently dropped it off in a parking lot where they thought people were honest. It was a law firm. And it was over near 610 Loop, so it was several miles away. And yeah, it was there just that morning. And one of the attorneys, in fact, is the one who found it, brought it in, had his receptionist call me. I went and picked it up, and I said several hallelujahs. I was so grateful, and it was a great demonstration. And you can't give up too soon on these things. It shifted me to a deeper place of knowing what I know and what I teach. To be able to have that demonstration is very powerful. So I have that with you. You need to realize that happens. And it's a great thing to record it in a gratitude journal. If you don't have one, make one, really. One of our board members shared how her son, 8-year-old son, started a gratitude journal. Answered prayer and a kind of prayer journaling. And she shared with me one of his entries. She was so moved and touched, she copied her son's entry into his gratitude journal. And I said, when she read it, I said, can you give a copy